Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 193. Working together to ensure victory. The boss snake did its best to send Li Jinglong flying as it jerked its head around. At this point, its body was already burned to the point where its scales were peeling off, and fresh blood was seeping everywhere. Its eyes were blood red and hideously terrifying. Li Jinglong fell to the ground, his entire body in great pain, and he grabbed the stalagmites that grew out of the ground to help himself to his feet. Both of Qiu Yangxi's hands were wrapped tightly around the devil-subduing staff. The flow of the earth veins' energy split off and instantly flooded his body, and the human and the snake faced off against each other. Qiu Yangxi was in so much pain that he shouted loudly, his robes burning away into nothing, revealing his bare, muscular form, his long hair fluttering. Hung Jun poured the last of his magic into the pentacolor sacred light, if only to prevent the cavern from collapsing. Because of that, he lost control of the Yao binding rope, and the boss snake instantly struggled free. It opened its gaping maw, two sharp fangs biting down towards Qiu Yangxi. Qiu Yangxi withstood the force of that blow, but his hands gripping the devil-subduing staff would not stop trembling. "Wrong," a voice seemed to say in his ear. "Why is it you, Qiu Yangxi?" In the split second that the snake fangs were about to close, someone shot towards the snake's mouth. It was Li Jinglong. He dragged a stone pillar along as he kicked off of something on the ground, leaping through the air into the snake's mouth. He then called upon all the strength in his body to swing the stone pillar, trapping the snake's jaws in that opened position. The immense force that the boss snake was using to close its jaws was put to a stop just like that. In the next moment, the shadow that Li Jinglong had stepped on shot into the air like an arrow, revealing the figure of the grey wolf. The grey wolf then somersaulted, transforming into Morrigan's human form, who drew the moon eclipse bow in midair and shot 3 arrows towards the boss snake. The boss snake roared as it writhed and dodged. Hung Jun was in the middle of struggling mightily to hold out when Lu Su came dashing past, suddenly appearing behind him. He slapped both his palms against Hung Jun's back, and the magic coursing through Hung Jun's body immediately intensified. The pentacolor sacred light grew explosively, lifting the stalactites up into the air. Lu Su shouted, "Smash it!" With Lu Su and Hung Jun's combined efforts, countless stalactites fell like a meteor shower, racing after the boss snake as they came crashing down. The boss snake kept crashing into its surroundings as it tried to escape the area around the array. Another wave of stone stalactites went flying by, and the boss snake was in great pain as it writhed, smashing into everything. Hung Jun dispelled the pentacolor sacred light, smacking his palm crisply against Lu Su's, shouting, "You've come at just the right time." The two of them then dashed towards the array. Qiu Yangxi was holding tightly onto the devil-subduing staff. The exorcists all prepared themselves. Li Jinglong and Hung Jun gasped for air, even as they, alongside Morrigan and Lu Su, stood guard over the array. The boss snake roared, its mouth open wide, and everyone turned to face it. "Qiu Yangxi!" Li Jinglong roared, "Pull it out! Yangxi! You can do it!" In the last moment possible, the boss snake came charging at them with all its might. Qiu Yangxi let out an explosive cry, and a powerful wave of golden light shone forth from the array, swiftly shooting up as it engulfed his entire body. Golden armor appeared over his form, and he looked impossibly valiant, confidence swirling around him. He held the devil-subduing staff in his hands, and he pointed it towards the boss snake. Golden light swept forth, turning into a wild burst of wind. The divinity Akalanatha descended to the earth, his 6 arms held outwards. The devil-subduing staff, the Yao-binding rope, and the moon eclipse bow each began to glow in turn, and a beam of golden light broke through the air, striking the boss snake. There was another wild, ear-piercing bellow, and the boss snake fell to the ground. It then coiled and climbed up the cavern wall, opening its mouth to spew a poisonous fog at them. However, Akalanatha disappeared after that single strike. Qiu Yangxi held the devil-subduing staff in his right hand and slowly opened his eyes. Within the array, he set himself in a fighting pose, holding the devil-subduing staff against his back like a kame staff, while his left hand was held out in front of him. "How am I supposed to use this thing?" Qiu Yangxi asked. "Everyone. Just like an ordinary artifact," Mo Rijin said. "I'll shoot it down." "This poison is too powerful," Li Jinglong said. "I'll draw its attention away, and Hung Jun will bind its head." But before he could finish, a huge staff suddenly appeared behind him, like the Dingai Shenzhen of legends. It suddenly extended outwards almost 20 zhang, growing as thick as a mountain. Golden light burst forth, and it smacked the boss snake solidly on the head. That dull thud could be heard for miles around, and everyone turned at once, all of them dumbstruck as they looked at Qiu Yangxi. Qiu Yangxi looked back in confusion, and the huge staff shrank back, turning back into the devil-subduing staff, which he then slung over his shoulders. "I've got it," Qiu Yangxi said. "Step aside. Leave it there, I'll go." After being struck by that blow, the boss snake's head immediately spun, and it fell right off the cavern wall. The array came undone, and the boss snake escaped, immediately slamming into the cavern walls in an attempt to escape. As Li Jinglong cried, "Don't let it run away," Qiu Yangxi's devil-subduing staff once again expanded outwards, growing and shrinking as he pleased. It left behind 1,000 after-images of a golden rod, and with another harsh slam, blue-greenish blood spurted forth from the boss snake. It let out howls of pain as it tried to hide from the staff. Lu Su and Hung Jun were dumbfounded at this sight. The two of them backed away a little, and everyone else immediately stepped aside. Qiu Yangxi waved that devil-subduing staff around, making it whistle through the air, and with only the two attacks of bringing it down and sweeping it across, he shooed the boss snake, which had escaped into the distance, back. The boss snake swiftly shrank back, evidently in great pain, but Qiu Yangxi brought the staff down once again. "All right? Stop fighting." Li Jinglong noticed that as soon as the devil-subduing staff was activated, it was very mighty. Cracks were actually beginning to appear along the mountain, and if they kept going like this the entire mountain could collapse. Hung Jun added, "Spare it?" Like a big monkey, Qiu Yangxi waved the staff around a few times. He still felt like he hadn't played enough with it, but on Hung Jun's behalf, he let it be. He pulled the staff back, before turning and smiling winsomely at Hung Jun and Lu Su. But the boss snake was already prepared for death. As soon as Qiu Yangxi retracted the staff, it dashed forward, impossibly swift. Hung Jun saw all of this happen, and he let out a loud shout, before dashing forward with glaive in hand, sweeping it forth in a death-defying blow. The glaive's blade energy shot forth, slicing through the boss snake's poisonous fangs, before it continued forth in its path and cut off the top half of its head. Qiu Yangxi's devil-subduing staff arrived on scene as well, piercing through the boss snake's throat, blocking off that poison fog. That staff shot forth like an arrow, skewering the boss snake on the devil-subduing staff. Blue blood spurted forth, and the eyes on that snake half-head bulged. It fell, just like that, to the ground. Hung Jun gasped for air, while Qiu Yangxi grabbed his shoulder and pulled him behind himself. He pulled the devil-subduing staff back. The boss snake was completely dead now, and its body fell bonelessly, like a rope made of hide, to the ground. It let out a loud boom, and poison fog erupted forth from its rear end, seeping forth. Instantly, the exorcists almost fell to the ground just as the boss snake had. Qiu Yangxi let out a weak chuckle, but before he could say something, the armor covering him shimmered and suddenly vanished. He turned into a completely naked, muscled man, carrying the devil-subduing staff on his shoulders. "Everyone. For now," Li Jinglong said. "Thank the heavens that it wasn't too difficult this time." "Not too difficult." Mo Rijin was torn between laughing and crying. Li Jinglong replied, "Compared to the Yao binding rope, it's still much better. Problems that can be resolved through fighting aren't problems. What I'm more afraid of are those problems that can't be resolved even through fighting. But why hasn't the Sword of Wisdom had any changes, even now? Chu Yangxi asked, frowning. Li Jinglong shook his head slowly. Technically speaking, they already had 4 artifacts at hand, but of those, only the Sword of Wisdom had never been fully used. But they couldn't call it completely useless either, because it could resonate with the others. This was truly too confusing. Hung Jun and Lu Su held onto the Huashi Zhao Yun, tending to his wounds. The Huashi drooped limply, but thankfully, it was still alive. Hung Jun made the last batch of medicine, plastering it against the broken stumps of its wings. To one side, Chen Feng asked, "Is that Zhao Yun? How did he end up so badly injured?" Hung Jun asked, "How'd you get here?" "The snakes that could fly made me a palanquin and brought me here," Chen Feng said, gesturing. Upon seeing the snake's broken wings, the Carpio couldn't help a shudder. Those stumps looked like fish fins, and they dripped with blood. Even just looking at the wounds hurt. "Son, did you bring anything to eat?" Hung Jun asked. Chen Feng handed Hung Jun half a stick of sesame candy. The two of them pressed their foreheads together, and Hung Jun gestured for him to eat it. Chang Feng said, "Dalin already went searching for something to eat, but there's nothing here." Zhao Yun's Huashi comrades had gone to pick up Chu Yangxi a day before. Lu Su and Mo Rijin had just so happened to be arguing over something trivial again, so they had come along as well. The Huashi also picked up Chen Feng, and so they made an open-top palanquin and flew the group to Tianluo Mountain. Mo Rijin had transformed into the Grey Wolf and gone ahead to scout out the enemy situation. Chu Yangxi brought Chen Feng into the cavern. The entire way there, Chen Feng had been eating sesame candy as he watched the great battle play out. All kinds of loud shouts issued forth from below, and glowing and falling stalactites too, but he couldn't see any of it clearly, so he hadn't been very worried. The Huashi opened its eyes, which were shining. Chen Feng hugged its head and stroked it. The Huashi was evidently in a bit of pain, and Hung Jun said, "Hold it down." Hung Jun applied the medicine, while Lu Su frowned. "Can it grow them out again?" The exorcists still liked this little guy Zhao Yun. Usually, he was very diligent in running errands, and he never complained nor talked back. Plus, he was very efficient at carrying out tasks, and was also the head of the Huashi tribe. He couldn't be counted as a king, but he could be considered a prince. Now, with him injured so heavily, Lu Su and Hung Jun found themselves at a loss to explain this to his subordinates. "You have to cultivate well," Hung Jun said. "If we could find some spiritual medicine to feed it, that would be good." Hung Jun went to go look for those blue medicinal grasses that grew in the cavern. He sniffed them, but despite their plentiful spiritual energy, they seemed to be for the sake of calming the spirit, so he didn't know if they'd have any regeneration effects. He had to make the medicine first, and he didn't dare to feed it to Zhao Yun just like that. "Lu Su, what if we pull out that snake's gallbladder and take a look?" The boss snake's huge corpse was still splayed out across the cavern. Li Jinglong had already led the rest of the group deeper into the cave to scout, while Hung Jun and Lu Su studied the dead boss snake. "It's a great yaoguai that has cultivated for several thousands of years," Yu Zayun said. "She had appeared at some unknown point. Retrieve the neodon, it can help increase cultivation." Hung Jun and Lu Su coomed over the snake's body. Yu Zayun chimed in, "It's in its head." So with that, the two people split open that half a snake's head. Yu Zayun found the neodon and gestured for them to look. "It's so little?" Lu Su asked doubtfully. The neodon was only the size of a fist. Cultivating for 3,000 years only to end up with something so small, Lu Su immediately felt that being a Yao was quite difficult. "Look at this dent in its head," Yu Zayun continued. "It had a horn, but it broke off." "Did my dad cut it off?" Hung Jun asked. "No, Yu Zeyun replied. It should have broken it off itself. It didn't want to become a dragon. It wanted to stay with your mom. Hung Jun. Lu Su hadn't heard that conversation, but Yu Zeyun, hiding behind the stalactites, had heard it all. There was a trace of confusion in Lu Su's eyes, but Hung Jun didn't explain, so he didn't ask either. Is it eaten just like this? Hung Jun asked. Does it need to be ground down? You mustn't grind it down, Yu Zeyun said. Several thousands years worth of cultivation will be wasted if you grind it down. Cut it into several pieces and feed it to him, and his cultivation will increase in leaps and bounds. That young fellow's pretty lucky. Do you want it? Hung Jun was reminded that Yu Zeyun couldn't turn into a human yet, probably because her cultivation had also been destroyed. Without effort, there is no reward, Yu Zeyun said. It's what he deserves, so give it to him. Lu Su thought, this group of Yaogwai are pretty open too. If it isn't theirs, then they won't snatch it unduly. Hung Jun washed off that fist-sized boss snake Niadan and brought it to feed Zhao Yun, but the Carpiao had heard it all. Lu Su. Hung Jun, do you have any conscience left? Zhao Zilong. Zhao Yun so badly hurt. But you even want to snatch away the Niadan that he needs as additional nourishment? I'm not giving it to you. The Carpiao turned over, splat, and looked towards the Huashi, seemingly trying to figure out its condition. Hung Jun cut the Niadan into two and squatted down, but the Huashi turned its head, reaching its tongue out slightly towards the Carpiao. Don't mind it, Hung Jun said. Give half to Zilong Xiang, Zhao Yun said slowly. It saved my life. It only untied a rope on your body. Hung Jun's head was in his hands. The Carpiao didn't dare to want it any longer and said, forget it, you eat it? Though it said, you eat it, its eyes were fixated pitifully on that Niadan. Lu Su had a flash of inspiration. If it ate it just like that, that might actually end up being the last step it needed in order to transform into a dragon. What would a Huashi turn into upon eating it? It was really as Yu Zeyun said, Zhao Yun had benefited greatly from this fortuitous series of events. If it hadn't been for Zilong Xiang, Zhao Yun continued earnestly, I wouldn't have come to your side as well. Give it half. If we are to transform into dragons, we might as well do it together. Zhao Yun. You're a good bro. The Carpiao's gratitude could not be surpassed, and it dashed forward, tightly hugging its body. Hung Jun and Lu Su. Lu Su was also very curious, and he waited to see what would happen. Even Yu Zeyun was a little nervous, and she stood to one side, watching. Hung Jun thus gave each half of the Niadan to one of the Yao. He first fed Zhao Yun his half, then turned to the Carpiao and fed. Its mouth is too small, the Niadan won't go in, Chen Feng said. The Carpiao was doing its absolute best and had its mouth open to the widest, but no matter what angle Hung Jun tried, he couldn't manage to stuff the half of that Niadan into its mouth. Lu Su. Yu Zeyun. What if we use a stick to poke it down? The Carpiao asked. The Carpiao was dead set on eating this half a Niadan today. Hung Jun asked, why don't we try borrowing Yang Cge's devil-subduing staff? Lu Su, let's go find some tongs. Yu Zeyun, why don't we heat up this grass carp a bit and quick freeze the Niadan? Matter expands when it's heated and contracts when it's cold, so it might end up going inside. The Carpiao replied, don't come up with these stupid ideas. It'll just be burning your mouth, Yu Zeyun said. You won't die. Either way, you'll turn into a dragon in just a bit anyways, so why do you care so much about this? Lu Su said expressionlessly, hurry up, we're still waiting to give you a name. That's right, why is Zhao Yun so silent? After the Huashi had consumed that Niadan, it had simply shut its eyes quietly and curled up. Hung Jun asked anxiously, Zhao Yun. Don't disturb it, Yu Zeyun said. It's digesting the cultivation. Hung Jun and Lu Su worked together to pick it up and put it in a safe spot, and Hung Jun even draped one of his own robes over it. The Carpiao held that Niadan, still trying to stuff it into its mouth. "Why don't you wait for a few days?" Hung Jun asked. "Once you get a little bigger, your mouth will get bigger too, then you can stuff it in." In the end, the Carpiao gave up. "All right. Those who are hasty aren't able to eat hot tofu, after all." Hung Jun put the Carpiao in charge of watching over Zhao Yun for the next few days, and he left the fish and the snake behind. He and Lu Su stretched, before looking around at their surroundings. End chapter. Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 194. Swords drawn and bows readied. After passing through the stretch of cave that the boss snake had been in, the area inside was even more spacious. Mo Rijin, Qiu Yangxi, and Li Jinglong stood in the karst cavern, only to see that there were stone pillars dotted around in the back, and the ceiling arched high above. The cave was a good 100 zhang tall, and the ground seemed to be a little square, giving the impression that the sky arced in a hemisphere above them. A very thin ravine ran across the roof of the cave, looking like a crack of sky. Sunlight shone through it, illuminating the cavern, and a waterfall thundered down. They were surrounded by a verdant layer of moss and other flora, and there was even a naturally formed underground lake. Birds chirped and called to each other, making this place seem like a separate little world. "An excellent place!" Qiu Yangxi exclaimed. This was a naturally formed paradise. Li Jinglong said, "This should do for building Hung Jun his capital." Mo Rijin added, "Also, everyone can come here often to reunite." Hung Jun, Lu Su, and Chen Feng walked in, and Chen Feng immediately let out a wah. He chased after Yu Zayun as they began to run through the cavern. Hung Jun asked, "But how will we bring the wood and stone for the building materials in? The entrance is only that big." "Yu Yao tribes have so many members who know how to fly," Li Jinglong replied. "I'm not worried about shipping things in. I just don't know how thick the walls are, and whether or not doing any sort of remodeling will cause a collapse." Though this was the boss snake's cavern, it had been slowly eroded by water seeping in over the passage of many long years. The power of the earth veins had magically changed the flow of the water, and as time passed, had created this natural space that seemed like it had been designed by the heavens themselves. Just as they were speaking, there was suddenly a bird call. The golden-winged great pen came flying in from where they came, and for a time, the cavern was filled with beams of light, as the huge Kun's pitch-black back rose up out of the lake. In the next moment, armor clanged as the king of the corpse ghosts that fell in battle led hundreds of his personal guards striding in. The ruckus they made was earth-shattering, as if thunder was pealing overhead. "Qingxiang, this is the place." Hung Jun and the exorcists immediately turned. Qingxiang studied his surroundings, and the Kun god rose out of the water, standing there silently. The corpse ghost king walked past the boss snake's body without a single glance, walking into the cavern and looking up at the sunlight shining through the crack in the roof. "How is it?" Hung Jun asked, smiling. "Do you like it?" The four Yao kings pondered silently for a moment, before finally Qingxiang nodded and looked towards the gathered exorcists. The corpse ghost king replied, "We like this place. When shall the move happen?" Places so dim that the sky and the earth couldn't be seen were what the Ghost King was most familiar with. Qingxiang thought for a moment, before replying, "The array will still require more time." "What array?" Hung Jun hadn't heard Qingxiang mention any array before. Qingxiang said to Li Jinglong, "Allow me to borrow a place to speak privately." Li Jinglong nodded agreeably, leading the exorcists away, leaving Hung Jun and the four Yao kings. Qingxiang then asked, "Where is the Fox King?" "Here." Yu Zayun had been playing hide and seek with Chen Feng, but upon hearing those words, she strode out from behind the lake. Qingxiang walked in front, with Hung Jun following behind, replying, "Jinglong has already come to an agreement with their emperor." He's been bestowed the title of the Marquis of Shu, and he shall give us Tianluo Mountain as well as the surrounding region of the Wu Range. There are not many Yao tribes, and look at this cavern. Building a city that can hold 500,000 will be more than enough. I thought that it would be in Chengdu, Qing Xiang replied condescendingly. Hung Jun hadn't imagined that Qing Xiang wouldn't be very satisfied with this place, and he was immediately stunned. Yu Zeyun replied, "It's all right. I don't want to mingle with the humans any longer, and this place is also handy for cultivating." The corpse ghost king said, "Lands where the sunlight does not touch shall do. Whether or not coexistence with humans is necessary is not something that we care greatly about." "That's right," Hung Jun said, repeating his explanation. "Being together with the humans is pretty weird. Before, in Chang'an, Xiaoyu managed to cause quite a lot of messes, and the exorcism department hasn't had it easy, having to handle all that." Qing Xiang suddenly turned his head and studied Hung Jun. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Is that what Li Jinglong wants to imply?" Hung Jun's forehead was furrowed slightly, as if he had realized something. The two of them stood face to face, and he replied, "It's what I'm saying." Qing Xiang replied mildly, "How did you discover this place?" Hung Jun replied, "Everyone helped me pick this place." "Are you unhappy with it? Then we can find another one." He felt a little dejected. He originally thought that Qing Xiang would like this place. "The sacred land of the Yao tribes," Qing Xiang said, shaking his head with a rueful smile. He reached a hand out to stroke Hung Jun's cheek. "For it to require a group of exorcists' approval in order to form, should I call you dumb or simply lacking in options?" Hung Jun keenly sensed that this was off. In reality, ever since he had known Qing Xiang, they had never discussed their views towards the humans. On some level, he felt that he might have misunderstood Qing Xiang. "Do you, not like Jinglong?" Hung Jun asked. "I thought you all treated my companions as being on our side." Back in Chang'an, Qing Xiang and Yuan Kun appearing together was the first time that they had properly met Li Jinglong. After that, when Chongming had locked Hung Jun up in Yaojin Palace, it was Qing Xiang who had purposefully set them free. He had once thought that, compared to Chongming, Qing Xiang was more able to accept that he and Li Jinglong were together. But after experiencing so many things, Hung Jun was no longer as naive and innocent as he had been. Now, he began to feel that under Qing Xiang's carelessly handsome smile lurked something deeper. "That was for your sake," Qing Xiang replied casually. "There are no friends that last forever, nor are there enemies that remain eternally." Hung Jun. Qing Xiang walked towards Yuan Kun, brushing shoulders as he passed. Ever since Yuan Kun had entered this place, he hadn't spoken, he had simply stood there quietly. Qing Xiang came to a stop by that large lake, saying, "Forget it, this will do for now." "Wait," Hung Jun suddenly said. "Qing Xiang, if you have something to say, then say it. Don't just say forget it. The other Yao kings sensed that the atmosphere was a little wrong now, and they all maintained their silence. Hung Jun continued. "To me, everyone is like my family, so what is there that we can't talk about? If you don't like this place, then we can find another, I'll keep searching. If you don't like the interference of the exorcism department, then I can also not ask for their assistance." After saying that, Hung Jun looked earnestly towards Qing Xiang's silhouette, saying, "I want to hear your sincere thoughts." Yuan Kun finally spoke. "Hung Jun, have you and the Emperor of the human realm come to some agreement?" The corpse ghost king interjected. "You all are already some thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years old. He has yet to reach maturity. What is the point in saying such things?" Hung Jun gestured that it was all right, and he explained what Li Jinglong had said to the gathered Yao kings. As he did so, he felt a little bit like a child that had done something wrong but didn't know what, especially in front of Qing Xiang. He then asked, Was this not the right way of doing it?" This vast lake was silent. Suddenly, in this moment, Hung Jun remembered the words that had been spoken the day that he left Yaojin Palace. They were, "I will not return to the human realm." Back then, he thought that these words were addressed to him, but now, he realized that they were actually. "I thought that you guys were good friends with Direnja," Hung Jun said earnestly. "The Yao tribes and humans, in the first place, shouldn't have." "We were, previously," Qing Xiang said. He looked into the lake at his own reflection, before washing his face with the water. After rising, he continued lightly, "But as of today, the responsibility of carrying Yaojin Palace's burdens may have to fall upon your shoulders. Yao and humans shouldn't have what? Shouldn't have killed each other, or should they not have lived together in this divine land? Hung Jun, wake up." Hung Jun watched Qing Xiang quietly. Qing Xiang said empathetically, "You are of the Yao tribes." Hung Jun felt as if he was understanding Qing Xiang for the first time. He hadn't expected that in this moment, he would actually give voice to such a sentiment. He studied the rest of the Yao kings, only to find that none of them were surprised at all. "Do you all think this way?" Hung Jun was stunned. Li Jinglong wasn't by his side, otherwise he would definitely have been able to parse out Qing Xiang's deeper meaning from just those few short sentences. The other three Yao kings did not reply. Evidently, they had come to an agreement on this long ago. "My mother was a human," Hung Jun protested. "Qing Xiang, tell me what you want to do." Qing Xiang sucked in a deep breath, before saying, "I want the Yao tribes to become the possessors of the divine land and recover their former majesty. I want you to demand a city from the humans' emperor. Yet look at what you have gotten on behalf of our entire people." Qing Xiang, the corpse ghost king, said coldly. The air between Hung Jun and Qing Xiang immediately crackled with tension, as if they were going to come to blows. Ever since he was small, Qing Xiang had rarely scolded him, but as soon as he grew angry, he was even sterner and even more terrifying than Chongming had been. "You've never told me this before," Hung Jun said icily. "I thought that you understood," Qing Xiang said. "Otherwise, what has everyone worked so hard for, even getting rid of Xiaoyu for you? Chongming chose you as the next Yao King exactly because he hoped that the day would come when we would be able to return to the divine land. That's impossible." Hung Jun's voice also grew a little louder. Both of them looked at each other. Qing Xiang was slightly out of breath, but he suddenly began to laugh. "You're pretty set in your opinion," Qing Xiang said. "You've grown up." "Hung Jun," Yuan Kun said slowly. "Is your supposed eternal splendor and glory making the entirety of the Yao tribes reside in this mountain cave, where the sun doesn't touch, from now on?" Immediately, Hung Jun didn't know how to respond. Qing Xiang continued, "I thought that Zhao Yun would remind you. But by the looks of it, that fellow did not pay heed to our command." "He did remind me," Hung Jun replied coldly. Now that he thought back, Zhao Yun's subtle nudges then must have been spurred on by Yuan Kun and Qing Xiang. "Do you all agree?" For some reason, a sense of irritation appeared in Hung Jun's heart as he spoke to the rest of the Yao kings. "Does everyone want to return to the world that the humans live in, take over their cities, and force them into the wilderness?" Yu Zayun and the corpse ghost king fell into a thoughtful silence. But it was right then that a voice said timidly, "Dad." Chen Feng walked out from behind a rock. Before this, he and Yu Zayun had been playing hide and seek, but halfway through, the Yao kings arrived, so Chen Feng hid behind a rock and ended up hearing everything. The Yao kings' attentions were all focused on Hung Jun, so they had actually, in an unprecedented moment, overlooked the child hiding behind the rock. Only Yu Zayun knew that Chen Feng was still there, yet she hadn't said anything. Qing Xiang's expression immediately changed, and he turned towards Chen Feng. Yu Zayun said coldly, "Qing Xiang." Hung Jun didn't understand what she meant, but he felt as if there was a clash between Yu Zeyun and Qing Xiang at this moment. He beckoned to Chen Feng. "Come here." Chen Feng stopped in front of Hung Jun, and Hung Jun knelt on the ground with one knee and hugged him. "It's awake," Chen Feng said, before holding out a little fiery red bird. That was the reincarnated Chongming. In that moment, Qing Xiang fell silent. Yuan Kun was a little taken aback, and he asked solemnly, "He's returned?" "Reincarnation and rebirth," the corpse ghost king said, "as it was meant to be." Hung Jun said, "I think that Chongming." "It's Gui Lai," Chen Feng corrected him. "Yes, Gui Lai," Hung Jun continued. "He probably won't complain about living here for now." When the phoenix appeared, despite it having undergone nirvana, it still seemed to provide a certain amount of intensity on Qing Xiang and Yuan Kun, forcing them to no longer pressure Hung Jun into making any decision. Qing Xiang said coldly, "Then remember your misstep, Hung Jun. I hope that all of this will only be temporary." Hung Jun took Chen Feng's hand and glanced at him. He said nothing more, instead turning to leave. "Perhaps," Hung Jun replied. The exorcists were outside in the forest, cooking meat to eat. After the boss snake died, the fog and clouds in the mountains had dissipated for some reason, and life seemed to have returned at the foot of the silent Tianluo mountain. Morigin had captured a wild boar from somewhere, brought it back, dumped it by the creek and was currently roasting the meat. Qiu Yangxi sat to one side on a rock, fishing. Originally, they had also wanted to cut off a small chunk of the boss snake's body because they were planning on tasting it, but they hadn't expected that this great Yaogwai, some thousands of years old, would be as hard as a tree. Its body had dulled several of their daggers, and peeling the skin off was even harder, so they had no choice but to give up. Li Jinglong was currently taking a midday nap. Lu Su called Hung Jun over, and Hung Jun nodded. He looked as if he had heavy thoughts weighing on his mind as he handed Chen Feng over to Lu Su. Suddenly, he wanted to take a bath, so he went to soak in the creek and gradually calmed down. While Hung Jun soaked in the creek water, Qiu Yangxi, dressed in nothing but his inner robes, whistled at him and began to laugh. Hung Jun had never been able to hide anything from them before, and whatever he was thinking always showed very clearly on his face. As soon as Qing Xiang had said, "Give us some space to speak," Qiu Yangxi had felt that something wasn't right, and now, he asked, "Has there been any definite information on Xiaoyu?" No. Hung Jun soaked his inner robes in the creek water, swished them around, and wrung them dry, staring fixedly at Qiu Yangxi. Qiu Yangxi didn't mention what happened in the mountain cave at all. Instead, he asked about Zhao Yun's condition, and Hung Jun filled him in. It was then that a flock of birds began to fly towards them from the horizon, and more flew in, slowly entering that cavern. "Oh, you guys are moving right away." Qiu Yangxi chuckled. Hung Jun mustered up a smile. Qiu Yangxi beckoned to him, saying, "Come here and soak up the sun." Everyone had been splattered with snake blood, and they had all just taken a bath. Hung Jun crawled up onto the rock, and he and Qiu Yangxi sunned themselves. Once they were done, he couldn't resist letting out a sigh. "What's wrong with your mom?" Li Jinglong asked. Chen Feng had been led onto the grass. Not far away, Morigin was roasting the wild boar. Li Jinglong lay there, taking in the sun, and when Hung Jun came over, he was already awake, he simply didn't open his eyes. Chen Feng came over and crawled up towards him. Just as he sprawled out on his chest, Li Jinglong spoke, still with his eyes closed. "He doesn't know if he should let me say," Chen Feng replied anxiously. "How are you so smart?" Li Jinglong opened his eyes and studied Chen Feng curiously. Chen Feng was only a little more than 4 years old, yet he seemed to understand everything. Chen Feng was a little hesitant, and Li Jinglong sat up, saying earnestly, "In this world, only I can make him happy again and get rid of that frowning face of his. If you want to tell me, then tell me, but if you don't dare to, I won't force you to." Chen Feng thought for a moment, before he hugged Li Jinglong around the neck and scooted in close to his ear to say something to him. Not long after, Mo Rijin called that the food was ready, so Qiu Yangxi slung his arm over Hung Jun's shoulder and came over. Everyone was wearing just their inner robes, and they sat down in a circle on the grass to eat. The atmosphere suddenly grew a little strange. Qiu Yangxi glanced meaningfully at Li Jinglong, and Li Jinglong only picked things from their fight against the boss snake to speak about, instead of asking after Hung Jun. But Hung Jun had already been together with Li Jinglong for this long, so how could he not sense it? Everyone was very animated as they spoke, but as they were all discussing the boss snake, Hung Jun felt a little uneasy. What should we do next? Mo Rijin asked. Li Jinglong nudged Hung Jun, asking, should we go back to Chengdu? Find a few stonemasons and master carpenters to look at your people's sacred land. Hung Jun, Just as Hung Jun was about to say, I have something to say to everyone, Li Jinglong's glance stopped him. Qiu Yangxi said, since we have nothing to do anyways, we might as well wait to hear back from Atai first before heading to Zoage. It was then that the birds that came flying towards them increased in number, and along the banks of the creek, the Ghost King's great army came passing through, riding their war horses as they charged up Tianluo Mountain. The fish swimming in the creek swelled into schools, glimmering as they swam through the water. Wow, your Yao tribes have quite a few members, Qiu Yangxi said. When Hung Jun saw that, he felt absolutely stunned. Those that flew in the sky, those that swam in the water, the beasts that walked on land, and squadrons of corpse ghosts all rushed up Tianluo Mountain at the same time. Whenever the corpse ghost squadrons passed by, they all lifted the weapons in their hands at Hung Jun in a salute. When the birds flew by, they tucked in their wings, not daring to flap them in front of Hung Jun. When the wolves, foxes, badgers, bay, and other walking beasts went by, they pressed their ears flat against their heads in a show of respect for their leader. The corpse ghosts formed up in rows without any command, and silently but majestically, they began to move forward in a thunderous charge. The first 10,000 troops dashed up the steep mountain slope, charging straight forward. Hung Jun. The exorcists all rose to their feet, tilting their heads up to look at Tianluo Mountain. The world was pitch black, because all of the flying and walking beasts were all gathering here. This Yao Qi is amazing. This was the first time that Qiu Yangxi had sensed such powerful Yao Qi in his life. But as soon as the Yao Guai charged into the mountain, the Yao Qi lessened as well. It was as if the earth veins had the special power to cause Tianluo Mountain to absorb all that Yao Qi. A huge tiger suddenly dashed towards them. It glanced at the group, but when it discovered Hung Jun, it hurriedly lowered its head and silently dashed up the mountain. It took a whole 3 Shishan for the Yao tribes to finally all enter Tianluo Mountain. In the beginning, the exorcists were still counting, but as time went on their eyes were dazzled from the sheer number of them. Chen Feng watched all of this, his mouth wide open in shock. Do you want to go in and take a look? Lu Su asked Hung Jun. As Hung Jun hesitated, a long shrill sounded, and the golden-winged great peng spread its wings. It flew out of the entrance to Tianluo Mountain, before transforming into Qingxiang, landing on the grass at the foot of the mountain. The Yaoguai's sacred land being rebuilt is all thanks to the gracious help of the exorcists gathered here. Qingxiang smiled gently at Li Jinglong, recovering his usual temperament. Li Jinglong, the Yao tribes welcome you forth to observe a ceremony. Would you be willing to make an appearance? Naturally. Li Jinglong gestured for everyone to hurry up and put on their official uniforms. Qingxiang said to Hung Jun, let's go. Hung Jun said, what are we going to do? A ceremony, Qingxiang said. Hung Jun pondered for a moment, before he followed Qingxiang and flew into the depths of Tianluo Mountain. End chapter.